Hello, today we will cover two more elements in new areas of the housing development, that is institutional housing and rental housing. In the last day we discussed about the cooperative housing as a very important option for creating community and for creating affordable housing. So, we discussed that the cooperative housing is one of the option which offers you a very affordable option, because here the cooperatives are basically formed by the end user, by the owner in the beginning of the project, and once the cooperative is formed, it is registered under the government acts, rules and regulation, and after the registration the cooperative gets the land from the government, or it can get the land from the market. Both is possible. After getting the land, they do their own designing with the help of a designer, and take the decision about the projects every stage of the project. So, here one advantage of the cooperative housing is that since there is no developer involved in the whole process, so profit elements is no longer there. Therefore, the cooperative housing is a very nice option for creating affordable housing. At the same time, unlike the other group housing, where we have seen that in the group housing the buildings and the infrastructures are made, but the people at the community is built after a long year, say 10 years, 15 years or 20 years. So, in this case, when the cooperative is formed, the community is there from the beginning. So, cooperative housing ensures the community building in the housing, and also it ensures the affordable options for housing, new areas of housing. We also showed you some example as a case study that how in a city we can take this strategy to encourage or promote the cooperative housing by creating various options of cooperative housing, like small cooperatives, medium cooperatives and the larger cooperatives, and for every level, like middle income group, lower income group and also higher income group people. So, cooperative housing is there is no doubt that it is a very good option, and every housing strategy should consider cooperative housing as one of the option. Now, today we will discuss two more options which are also important while we make the housing strategy. One is institutional housing, and second is the rental housing. The institutional housing, or it is termed as employees housing, you might have seen that various government departments or directorates or many private companies, they provide housing facility, accommodation facility for their employees. So, those kind of facilities are termed as institutional or employees housing. The basic objective of this employees and institutional housing is to basically to create a nice balance between the work and home, so that your travel time between your home and the work is less or manageable. That is number one. Number two, the community is developed through the employees housing, because all of them are known to each other, they are coming from they are working in the same organization, same office. For this reason, those can be very good option. One for the work home situation, to create a balance between work home. Second could be a very good example for creating the community. And third is that it can be also very good option for short duration of the people, because for the short duration like say 6 months or 1 year, you may not get a feasible housing accommodation in a bigger cities. It is very difficult, because in a bigger city you come there, you search for the housing facilities, and then by the time you get your housing facility or housing accommodation, your duration is over. So if the employees, the employers or the institutions, they provide the housing facility or the accommodation facility, it is always better. Then another is that because it is a short duration, it is also affordable and very much convenient, and also it is more safer. It ensures safety and security also, because here your employers and the institutions are involved to secure the safety and security. So this kind of institutional housing, employees housing can be promoted in the while we make the housing strategy. Now why, where and how we should build all those kind of housing. Now please recall our land value curve, what we discussed earlier, that if this is the central business district, the land value curve is something like that. The more you go beyond your city limits, the land value becomes less. So this is the land value and this is the distance. Now the commercial offices and institutional campuses could be situated in the near the CBD or very prominent place, could be prominent place. So it may not be possible to accommodate every housing in the very near location of the CBD, because the land value near the CBD is very high. So what can be done? And also you cannot make the housing facility at the extent of the city, at the periphery of the city, only because land value is very less. So if you do that, your travel time between your work and home again will be more. Between your work and home will be more. So the strategy what could be taken for optimizing the location of the office and location of your home, institutional housing, is to create a compact development, create more compact and high density development, and use and promote mixed use. So to solve this problem, your strategy could be you go for compact development, that is high density. If you promote high density compact development, you can ensure or you can encourage the companies or the institutions to build up their own houses within their campus, or you can go for high rise and mixed use development. So with the mixed use development, you can within the same campus you can accommodate the commercial or the institutional facility and also residential facility. It is not a much problem for the institutions which are by and large situated at the periphery of the city, like the major technical institutions or major medical institution. So by virtue of their location in the periphery of the city, it is no longer a problem for the related to land value. So they can have the compact development and the mixed use development in their campus, but it is definitely a problem to afford a large amount of institutional housing within the very vicinity of the central business district, because the land value is very high. So for those kind of problem, we have to go to high rise, mixed use and compact. Apart from that, there could be a possibility that you provide your work and livelihood opportunities at the center, and you provide the housing somewhere in the periphery or the near periphery, and you connect these two, work and home, with a very good connection, and if you plan that connection, connectivity and mobility in integration with the work and home, then it is possible to integrate even if you do not go for mixed use and centralized development of the institutional housing. So, at the strategy level, if we can create this kind of land, this kind of strategy, it is possible to create institutional housing and employees housing. One problem of the employees housing and institutional housing is that its maintenance and the poor quality by which it is criticized, but definitely it is a one of the option which can create community and which can offer short duration affordable housing. Similarly, we consider rental housing as one of the very important option for short duration and even for the long duration affordable housing which people can afford without purchasing a full house, without purchasing or acquiring a full house. So, rental housing is basically a housing which is rented by a original owner. The rent could be the yearly rent, or it can be a different time duration rent depending on the act, depending on the context. But the advantage for the rental housing is that you do not have to pay, you do not have to purchase the house, but you just give a premium and a rent, monthly rent, and with that, which is very nominal and which is definitely within your affordable capacity, and you can afford this, you can have this accommodation in your city. The second advantage is the same with the institutional housing, that is the community. Here you know the persons who are taking the rent, so you know the person, after knowing them fully you are giving the rent. On the other side, the person who are getting the rent, they know their owner, and after knowing the owner and the area and the context, they are taking the rent. So, community is also developed through the rental housing, and also it can serve the short duration purpose like 6 months, 1 year or so. So, for short duration accommodation in any city, the rental housing could be very good opportunity for very good option. Now, in our country, by and large, we have made the policy or the planning for the housing for the family purpose. We never had taken such policy for the short duration and the housing options for the single persons and the fragmented family or the smaller family. For this reason, in 2015, Government of India, they have taken a national urban rental housing policy. Under that policy, they have come up with various suggestions and various recommendations which can be taken up at the state level, at the urban local body level. Some of the recommendations are like the rental housing could be a very important part of the housing strategy, number one. And second could be that for the rental housing, the authority could identify every category of the rental housing, the category in terms of economic group, category in terms of its duration, it could be like 1 month duration, it could be 2 months duration, the category in terms of their size, in terms of their location. But right now we do not have that much of data which can substantiate or which can tell you that what kind of estimation, what kind of demand is can be forecasted for the rental housing. But yes, it is a very essential need for the city, because in the cities we have not considered the rental housing, and it is a need for the day, and people who are coming from the other city or the rural areas to the city or the urban areas, they take the informal house and make slums and squatter. So, in absence of the rental housing, people are somewhat forced to accept the informal condition or inferior conditions. So, we can understand that if we provide the rental housing in more number, in adequate number, in proper locations, then the formation of the future slums, future squatters could be addressed through making the rental housing. I request you to recall our discussion related to JNNURM, Rajiv Awas Yojana and the currently Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. On those program, you have seen that the rental housing was given a major focus to prevent the future slum. So, this is for the first time in our country that as a whole at the central level we have given rental housing such importance to address the problem of the slums and squatter. So, rental housing and institutional housing both can offer a very good work home situation, short duration housing accommodation and community development, and affordable and convenient option, and also it can offer the legitimate safety and security option. Now, based on that, let us see some salient points which we could take take a note of it and we can use for further application. These points we have already discussed: the better community development and the minimum homework distance. Apart from that, if we supply more number of institutional housing and rental housing, it is also true that the pressure on the housing market by the people who needs housing for short duration will be very less, and the market could act freely for the other category of the housing need. That is one very important point. Low duration, it serves the low duration purpose, we have already told, and also it serves the housing need for the single and the small family. For example, if a person who is coming to the bigger city for his job location or for his job transfer with his a child, so how he will be or she will be staying in a full apartment, and it is not, may not be affordable. So, for those kind of purpose, the employees housing or the rental housing could be very good option. So, the one strategy which we discussed is to allocate land. When we are allocating land at the housing strategy level at the various sectors and various blocks, we should allocate land specific for the rental housing and employees housing, and we can have a discussion during the visioning process, during the strategy making process with the prospective stakeholders like major public sector undertakings, major public organizations or major private organizations, so that we can ensure that the land allocated in the city through the housing strategy and planning will be utilized by them. The policy to ensure work home package to employees could be done. We have talked about the transit oriented development, which is nothing but the development, compact development, high rise development, mixed use development around the transit centers, around the nodes. The basic objectives of the transit oriented development is to reduce the work home travel. So, that this could be very good complementary if we take a policy for the companies and the government organizations as a work home package, that that you take the job location or the transfer and you take the accommodation near about which is possible. So, that could be another very good policy. One of the major problem in the employees housing and the rental housing is that poor infrastructure condition and the service condition and its maintenance. So, the mechanism could be taken, mechanism could be there in the public side or the infrastructure development side to provide the speedier housing infrastructure amenities, so that people no longer differentiate the rental housing and employees housing with the market provider housing, and they consider the employees housing and rental housing as a very important option, very viable and feasible option to have a quality of life in the city. And also some state government, they need to have the legal reform. Some of the legal provisions under these state acts are detrimental to promote the rental housing. So, those kind of legal barrier need to be overcome. So, for that rent control acts reform is required. After the JNNURM, most of the state governments, they have already done this reform. We have talked about the reform earlier in the first session, in the first section of this lecture series. So, we are not going into that, but please take a note that reform in the rent control acts is required to ensure the right of the owner and right of the persons who are staying in the rental housing for short duration. This we have already discussed. Another very important strategy could be that the use of a floor area ratio and floor space index and mixed uses to promote rental housing. You can to encourage the rental housing, definitely you can give more floor area ratio, more FSI to the companies, to the government organizations to create a compact development. Otherwise, the housing will go to the city extent or to the periphery. So, that is not desirable. So, FAR FSI could be a good tool to ensure that. in all the state governments you have seen that there are various various rental housing agency including housing board and various rental housing agency at the public level or the private level. So, how those agencies could be strengthened, how their capacity could be built up and those could be empowered to control and to enforce the Rent Control Act and to ensure the right of the people who are staying in the rental housing and the employees housing. Another criticism which the rental housing gets is the poor maintenance and operation. So, there should be a mechanism like a financial mechanism could be made that when a rental housing is propagated or institutionalized, some part of the rent, some amount of the rent maybe 10%, 20% may be earmarked as a corpus fund to create a mechanism to for the maintenance and operation of the whole campus, because it is essential, because over the period of time the buildings gets deteriorated, structurally it becomes vulnerable, the service wise it becomes very vulnerable to the disease and all those epidemics. So, those are undesirable conditions, and to avoid all those conditions we have to have the mechanism, financial mechanism within the rent control, within the rent pricing mechanism that is need to be taken. Another important scheme which came in the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is the institutional rent to own scheme. The persons who are not able to afford a market provided housing, they can afford a rental housing and over the period of time they can be offered the rental housing provided they pay all the rents throughout that period for every month, and with a premium of some amount the house can be allocated to them after some period of like say 10 years or 20 years. So, rent to own scheme is a very innovative scheme, and this scheme can encourage people to have their house in an incremental fashion, like with the incremental nature of their income capacity or strengthening of the income capacity. After some time they can own the house by giving some premium amount and also paying the rent amount regularly in every month. So, these are the challenges. One challenge is we already discussed, the land supply and housing infrastructure, poor quality because of the lack of maintenance. So, for that we can create a corpus, we have already discussed. And another is that when we make the planning and the strategy for the housing at the city level, we should ensure the participation of the major employers and major agencies or the stakeholders who can create the rental housing in bigger numbers and employers housing in the bigger number, so that we can allocate the land at their convenience. So, it is possible, and nowadays whenever we make any new town or any satellite town or any new areas of the housing development, we do this kind of exercise, and based on their feedback, their response, we allocate the land, and that becomes one input in the land allocation strategy apart from the other technical inputs which we have discussed in the last few lectures. We have discussed about the legal barriers like Rent Control Act. There are some kind of administrative and control barriers, financial barriers. For example, development control could be a barrier in some for some cities, like if you apply for a mixed use development with a rental housing, some of the municipal authorities or municipal corporation may not allow you to sanction the project. So, those kind of barriers should be taken out, barriers should be addressed. So, barriers could be legal, administrative and development control. The financial barriers, if a small developer wants to develop rental housing and they do not have the adequate finance to develop that, the institutional finance mechanism by the HUDCO and the other nationalized housing, the housing loan housing bank, national housing finance organization, they should encourage and they should promote, they should facilitate the financing mechanism of the rental housing development by the small developer, even if it is very small. So, because through this kind of small steps, the rental housing could be a very good option for a short period, affordable option for the people, which can create a robust community. And also we can promote regularization and PPP. There are rental housings in our country or in our cities which are not regularized, which may be the rental housing are there maybe for long duration, but those are not regularized and staying there like in a slum like situation. So, those rental housing could be regularized as is where is basis. In JNNURM and in Rajiv Awas Yojana and in Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, we have taken a broad strategy and policy to regularize as much as possible of the informal housing. Though we will be taking separate lectures on the informal housing, but we can take a note here that all the unregularized rental housing could be regularized with some kind of control mechanism involved with this. And also we can promote the PPP, the involvement of the public, private and partnership. We discussed the affordable housing in partnership mechanism, where Government of India is giving financial support to the private developer to create more number of housing in affordable option. But for the rental housing also we can create and we can promote this by inviting the private agency, and we can provide land free of cost, and we can tell them to develop the rental housing with a cost and with a profit sharing basis, because land is given by the government and the financial investment is given by the private agency. So, those kind of mechanism could be explored in our cities. So, if we take all this coping mechanism and all these strategies, there is a possibility that we can create more number of rental housing, and rental housing could be a very good option to prevent the future slums and squatter. So, today we discussed the two similar concept like institutional housing, employees housing and rental housing, to ensure and to appreciate and to understand that employees housing and rental housing both can be very good option for the short duration purpose, and this can create community, this can reduce the work home travel, it can reduce the stress on the housing market, it can reduce the stress on the roads by creating the lesser travel time, it can create the compact city, and it can also address the future development of the slums and squatter. So, to create more number of rental and employees housing, we can allocate the land, we can take the policies like compact development using more FAR, more high rise, more mixed use development, and we can also encourage financial, we can address the financial barrier, administrative barrier, legal barrier, and also we should promote the private sector to come up and to work in collaboration with the public agency to create rental housing and employees housing. So, we end up with this note that a rental housing and employees housing is a very good option to promote affordable and affordable housing and community development. So, next lecture we will discuss about two more options of the housing supply, which serves different purpose for the people, which is working persons hostel and service apartments, that will be covered in the next lecture. So, thank you for today's lecture.